What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at the ever so popular S&P 500 ETF SPY, ticker symbol SPY, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Wednesday, May 8th. All right, guys, SPY here today up 62 cents per share. That's plus 0.12% in regular trading hours. Likely to be a little bit different in the after hours by the time you see the video. However, as always, assuming volume is low in the after hours, take that with a grain of salt. We're likely to see that volume fizzle out. If it is higher, it's a little bit more of a definitive move. Typically, though, that will take some kind of catalyst. So, as always, the lower the volume, the more of a grain of salt that after hours movement should be taken with. All right, let's take a look here. We're going to do a quick little volume profile analysis, try to pull out the bias that in the underlying, right, that kind of beneath the move. Then we're going to take a look at the psychological levels, the trading levels that I think we need to be aware of because the big money's paying attention, so we need to by default. And then we'll finish out with the implied volatility, the expected move, and the directional bias coming out of the chain. First up, guys, macro stuff here tomorrow. At 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Fed's Jefferson is speaking. At 11:45 a.m. Eastern Time, Fed's Collins is speaking. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Fed's Cook is speaking. That's really about it here tomorrow. Now let's get started here with our volume profile analysis, pulling out some bias on the 5-minute chart. Listen, guys, by the way, if you are new here, SPY is a daily upload. It hits every single day at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 30 minutes after the market closes. So my goal here is 10,000 subs, and I know we can get it done, but not without your help. So I greatly appreciate it, and I'll keep the videos coming. Now, the volume, right? We're looking under the hood here, okay? So if we pull up volume, we're going to look at the whole day with kind of an emphasis on this move here with this pop and then recovery to, before and after. But let's look through the whole day. You see the open, very contextual, very normal volume throughout really the entirety of the trading day. We have little pops like this one here. Okay, that's too much of a risk of fooled by randomness. I don't like those little outlying candles. And then as we move into that fade, that sell-off, we saw volume start to pick up a little bit. But honestly, guys, there's such a mixed bag here in terms of, it's not like we saw these 5 consecutive red bars with 1 million shares. That would be obvious. But it's actually very contextual compared to the rest. And then once we really see volume start to pick up, we start getting, it's kind of every other candle is red and green, which essentially cancels each other out. All right. Now, I think what we should do is we should compare this volume to yesterday. You can see that the volume into the close was actually relatively high. Now, if we look here, we see increasing volume into the close. That's very normal, okay? But this first bar before the close, nearly 5 million shares. However, it's really important to understand that on SPY, this is different from the blue chips. On the blue chips, we tend to see the rebalancing occur immediately after the bell. And that's reflected in the first bar after the close. On SPY, for whatever reason, these funds and institutions, the algorithms tend to trigger before the bell. And that tends to leave the final bar on SPY, along with, of course, like retail and just human moves right before the bell closes, right before the market closes. That, of course, has a tendency of pumping volume. All right. And, we were seeing some green bars into that move. So I tend to take that last bar, again, with a bit of a grain of salt anyway. But I'll include it if there's some really obvious, like, for example, if we saw 6 red bars on higher than average volume, right? Out of context, higher than the average day volume is what I mean, into the close, then I would consider that some bearish bias heading into the close. But the truth is a very, very mixed bag. It just happens to be a little higher volume than normal. So at this stage, we're left in a really interesting spot because we have just a barely green day, 0.12% to the upside. And then when we look at the actual volume profile, there's very little bias to be had. So let's do what we can to pull something out here. Let's move on to the self-fulfilling prophecy psychological levels. And you can see on the 30-minute, things are going pretty well if you're a bull, at least thus far. We finally made a test to that 50-period moving average here today, and it was a little bit slow to hold, but it held. You guys know I typically like to see low volume retests and then high volume bounces after an upside break. However, the stock or ETF, I suppose, being above the level already heading into today, I don't care what volume it tests on, as long as we see a higher volume bounce. We actually saw a lower volume kind of like soft bounce. It was not all that impressive, but it held, which is the important thing. For an optimal scenario, we would have seen a hard bounce on higher volume than the retest looking down here. So bulls tomorrow, looking at that 50 period here on the 30-minute chart, if we retest it again, which is not unlikely, given how close we are to it, I would like to see a high volume bounce away, what we didn't get today. Whereas you bears, high volume break downside, get below that level, and then intraday during the session, whether the break happens intraday or in pre-market, either way, during the actual session, I would like to see a lower volume retest and then a higher volume rejection. If you're a bear, that could set you guys up for a near-term test, or at least heading downside toward what that next area on the 30-minute would be, which is the 200 period. All right. Now, the 4-hour chart, let's take a look. You guys can see here, there's a little bit of distance here. But in reality, if we look at the percentage, it's not going to be all that tremendous. It's a little over 1%, 1.05% to the downside to make a test of that 200 period. So bulls, if we were to see a test of that, at this point, that wouldn't obviously be ideal from like a day-to-day perspective, because that would be a larger red day. But if we were, I would just want to see that 200 period hold, since the 50 period is still kind of trying to catch up on the 4-hour. Bears, and I'll come back to bulls, but bears, getting back beneath that 200 period and just reclaiming that as resistance would set you up just in time probably for an immediate test of the 50 period, which would be a little thicker area to get through, ultimately wanting to get back below both of those. Bulls, what I'm really just watching for here is ideally I'd want to hang out, up in this region, not giving up a full percent, because that's a bit of a move for SPY. Again, if we did, we'd want to see that hold. But ideally, just on the 4-hour here, I'm only watching the 50 period for the sake of wanting it to get upside harder and harder. Reclaiming tiny little psychological levels like 510, right? Heading up toward 515, but it's going to take time. The 4 hours is a little slower. Okay, so I'm just wanting to see this move upside just to get that, potential psychological support up close to the stock, get the feet up underneath the move. Like I say a lot, right? We're looking at all the charts. I want the 30-minute, the 4-hour, the daily. If we can have psychological support levels across all of them, that's ideal, right? But that doesn't happen all that common. That's not all that common, right? That doesn't happen all the time. It's a great scenario to be in, so it's kind of what I'm always after, but we have to piece it together, piece by piece, chart by chart, time frame by time frame. So that's why I like to look at all these separately. So that's really what I'd be looking for here. Bears, if you could see that 50 period flatten out ahead of the 200 period, if not 510, that would be great. Now, the daily chart, guys. The daily is the most important. You can see that we, in the last couple of days here, we just reclaimed the 50-day moving average. That's a big deal. All right, now we're, of course, holding it today. We have yet to see a retest. I prefer to see a retest, okay, just because it shows confirmation. But I think for you, if you're looking at this chart, you have to look at this through the context, through your own lens, right? Because if you're more of a mid to longer term, or in more of a mid to longer term trade, well, then taking a bit of a retest of the 50-day and confirming that is a good base to build for a more mid to longer term trade, because you're kind of erasing that doubt in the upside, right, out of the bears' minds. Because a lot of bears are looking at this and they're thinking, we're going to make a retest of that 50-day, right? That's just the psychology of this chart. It's very clear. And your job as a bull is to look, okay, how can we erase that, or at least as much of those little things as possible out of the bears' minds, which in turn also encourages bulls. Now, if you're in a very short-term trade, you don't really have the luxury of getting that confirmation. So ideally, you would just want to stair-step upside on psychological levels like retake 520, retake 525, which would also be an all-time high, right? And to the downside, really looking to hold those psychological levels like each $5 increment, like 515, right? But understand that 50 period is likely to act as at least a potential support given a downside test, which means that you bears, really, your ultimate goal here on the daily is to give that up, the 50-day. Okay, implied volatility here, you can see it faded a little bit again here today. If you compare this to the last month, it's very low. If you compare it to the last 3 months, it's in the mid to low range. Okay, just understand that. If you're seeing some IV crush, that's your culprit. If you're looking to purchase options, the lower that goes, the more favorable conditions become. okay, because you're paying less Vega value up front. Now, expected move on SPY, we have the luxury of daily expiration. So the expected move by tomorrow's close, May 8th, compared to today's close, is plus or minus $2.29 a share. That is the volatility expectation being priced in by the market, which is a very important piece of the puzzle, right? You need to understand volatility expectation just as much as you understand your own directional bias, especially when trading options, right? It's heavily overlooked, and I'm not sure why, because it doesn't add a ton of complication, and there's just such a huge inherent disadvantage to ignoring volatility expectations. So that's what it is heading into tomorrow's close compared to today's close. Now you might be thinking, well, what about directional bias? Well, here we go. Here's the volume here from today. You can notice it's still going up. Now, this is something that a lot of you guys might not be aware of. If you watch the SPY chain after hours, you'll notice, and you'll see right there, it just stopped. Right? I lined that up on purpose. It is 3:15 Central Time. SPY options actually trade for 15 minutes after the bell as well. A lot of people don't know that. Okay, so as you can see it stopped in real time. That's when it hit 3:15 Central Time. So if you look here, we have a little over 6.9 million total contracts traded here today. A little over 3 million were calls, and 3.9 million were puts. So 3.03 million calls, 3.9 million puts. That's a bearish bias on the overall. And then the short-term speculators, right? The 0 to 20 delta range, being that this is a video geared at tomorrow, 868,000 calls, 1.67 million puts. Okay, bearish bias out of the short-term speculators as well. Listen, guys, if your goal with this whole trading thing is to kind of try to expedite the process, that's what I built our private server for, our private community. Go ahead and take a look at that link in the pinned comment. That link will let you get grandfathered in at the current rate for whichever membership tier that you choose. If you're getting value out of these daily SPY uploads, please, I ask you to do one thing. It's free. Takes half a second. Leave a like on the video, and then get out of here and enjoy your day. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.